Old people of Reddit, what are some challenges kids today who romanticize the past would face if they grew up in your era? Using a typewriter, no editing, copy and paste, moving sentences or paragraphs with a click of a button. I typed my master's thesis on a manual typewriter. However, it was a source of income for people that were good at typing. Born in early 60s, up to the age of 10 or so he has cancer equals certain death. Don't need to know what stage it is. Don't need to know what type it is. Cancer equals dead. By 16 I could ask what type, if it was a leukemia or some simpler skin cancers, you have a chance. Ovarian, yeah, you're still ovarian equals dead. Today, some types are still monstrous. I had an aunt and a cousin both go from pancreatic. But, last time I checked, today, 2019, ovarian has a 45% 5-year survival rate, almost even money, and one form of leukemia flips from 95% death to 98% life with one shot. It may be a $5,000 shot, I don't know the cost, but to flip from 95% death to 98% life is amazing at almost any price. Losing any limb is horrible, but the prosthetic limbs today can be incredible, and our expectations are very different for childhood diseases. I have one friend where the DRs told his mother he has muscular dystrophy. He won't live to be 18. He'll be 73 this October 2019. Down syndrome, autism. Many were just shuttled off to die in sanitariums. For all our other problems, 2019 is a very different world in 1960, for the better, in many ways. If you suddenly wanted to know something like how to say dong in Chinese or what size of boots Napoleon was, you couldn't just Google it and have the answer in 5 seconds. You had to commit to that question. Get a book and hope the info was there or you found someone who knew about that topic. If you were lucky, your house had an Encyclopedia Britannica and you had so much information at your fingertips. 54 M3 channels on a crappy TV. If the president was speaking you were screwed. I remember Watergate mainly because it preempted the Flintstones and Gilligan's Island for a freaking month. Old bastards like me romanticize staying outside all the time, but we did that because if you were inside your dad was using you as his personal remote control to flip channels. I remember Watergate mainly because it preempted the Flintstones and Gilligan's Island for a freaking month. That's honestly kinda hilarious. No indoor plumbing. You get to use an outhouse which is freezing in the winter and stinks to high heaven in the summer. Water comes from a well, dispensed by hand pump. Want a hot bath? Carry bucket after bucket of water to be heated on the stove. End up with a tepid bath. Then you have empty the wash tub with a bucket, so you had to carry the water twice. When you heard an obscure song you liked, you had better hope the radio DJ told you the title afterwards or you could just forget about ever figuring out which one it was. I spent years looking for a song I heard once on the radio and didn't hear again for 2 years but immediately recognized it. It was Kingdom of Rain by The. Getting lost anywhere with not phone to guide you out. Getting an address without any clue on where exactly it is and getting crappy directions from who you ask. Getting directions with landmarks. Turn left by the rundown shack and right at the giant dead tree. Landline phones and having to talk to a girl's parents to get her on the phone was terrifying. Not cute or fun, it sucked. My dad was apparently crap scary, so I heard from a guy who chickened out on calling me. If you need information on something, you walk or ride your bike to the library, go to the card catalog and search fruitlessly for an hour, then go ask the librarian for help. Check out the book and go home, read it. Don't forget to return it or you'll have a fine. Also took like 3 days to settle an argument. You'd get into some stupid disagreement with your friends in elementary school. Fume for a day knowing you're right. Get your hands on your source material proof, and then shove it in their stupid face the next time you saw them. Blockbuster and the relief you felt when there were 20 DVD game cases and one was still available. You felt like you just told the world yes there wasn't an option to download or go to 20 red boxes. If BB didn't have it, F my Friday night. BB genuinely stressed me. Also, freaking dial-up. You really have no idea what a pain in the butt dial-up was and that noise it made. Haunting. Plus family picking up the dang phone when you were about to get a web page up after 8 minutes. Communication. I have been in so many situations, setting up last minute get-togethers, and thought Jesus this would be literally impossible without cell phones. So many scenarios, especially when traveling or meeting up or changes to plans. That, and God bless Google Maps. When you get news a movie is coming out that you are anticipating, and having to wait to see the trailer in the actual movie theater during previews to get a first glimpse at it. In our little one-stop-light town, it wasn't a guarantee that the movie you were hoping for would even make it to your theater, or show up for 2 days and then gone. Before GPS or websites like MapQuest, you would use paper maps to find the best route to your destination. Then you would listen to the traffic station on AM radio to find out about traffic on your route. Changing routes because of traffic often meant pulling over to study the map. You're bored and want to hang out with your friend? Go to the kitchen and use the phone on the wall to call his house, which rings on the phone in his kitchen. No one answers because of one of million reasons he is not within earshot of that phone. That's it. You're out of options. Go back to being bored. Alternatively, your friend isn't home but their mom answers and forces you into awkward small talk. Having to cope with boredom. A long distance drive when you're a passenger, waiting in a long line, waiting for someone to pick you up, waiting at the dentist's office. We had to deal with those types of situations without electronic devices to keep our minds occupied. A long distance drive when you're a passenger. I always imagine a parkour athlete running alongside the car and dodging obstacles. Using computer systems like DOS, BASIC etc. People nowadays are so used to having an interactive interface they have no idea all the work that goes under it. When you are a 8-something-year-old just wanting to play some goddamn pirated Mario port your friend gave you, it could get very frustrating. And let's not talk about when your friend just hands you a notebook with the code to a game, and you spend 3 hours typing it in, just to find out you hate that game. Nowadays if you open DOS to do anything, people think you are a master hacker programmer who knows the secrets of the forbidden 8-bit black screen. 2 words for the early internet users. Trumpet windsock. I set this up so many times for friends, family, co-workers. Dial-up sucked, but it was all we had. Losing the car full of friends you were following to the party. Not only do you not get to go to the party, have fun finding your way home since you don't know where you are. Related, going to a random gas station late at night to buy a map of the area you're in. Sometimes it took years for movies to go from theater to rental purchase. I thought I'd die of old age before Jurassic Park hit VHS. Research papers at school, hit the library for days, make note cards, assemble by hand, and handwrite your first drafts. Then break out the 20-pound typewriter and pray you don't change your mind on how to word a sentence while typing. They weren't real sea monkeys. I'm from before video cassettes, so when a movie left the theaters, you didn't see it again for years, until it came on TV. I saw Star Wars in a big theater in 1977, when it was still called Star Wars. I saw it a couple more times in its theatrical run, then not again until like 1981 when it came on TV. Also, ditch weed and other assorted crappy drugs. I'm now the stereotypical old timer, going from I was smoking weed before you were born to flat on my butt in no time at all. If there was an interesting thing you wanted, it had better show up on the shelf of the 3 or 4 department store retail chains in the area, or not only would you not be able to buy it, you almost certainly would never know it existed. And there weren't that many national chains back then. Kmart, Sears, and maybe Woolworths. Walmart didn't come until later, so the chance that a distributor hit the ones in your area was pretty low. Catalogs were useful, but even they can only hold so much. Magazines were more plentiful and could broaden things up, but even that was pretty limited. Concepts like Avon make more sense in this context. A lot of people crap all over commercials and advertising, but it was literally the only way most people knew about new things. The exception was actual face-to-face gatherings. People did used to hang out at record shops, because that's the only place you're going to find new and interesting music. College also helped, but most people didn't go to college. I remember that there was one store in my relatively large top 20 city that sold anime stuff, or, as they called it back then, Japanimation, and the only reason we knew anything about it at all is because on our independent TV station, Remember those? They would show Robotech at like 2 in the morning. So if you were an anime fan, you only knew because you saw some weird unadvertised show on a ridiculously inconvenient time and also found out that 90 minutes away there was one store that sold related products or two. Was born in and grew up in Japan. This is also why conventions were super important back then. It was the only way that people who had similar interests could even communicate. Most newsletters or fan clubs were notoriously difficult to keep up on, but they made sense since there was no alternative. Can't speak to the truth of this, but my dad always said that kids were a lot tougher on each other when he was growing up, and both the schools and your own parents looked the other way. He got his butt kicked a million times and it was always just boys will be boys. My grandpa told him to return the butt kicking next time or just get over it. Suffice to say he had no nostalgia for his childhood. I agree. Adults were tougher on kids too, both verbally and physically. Some of the stuff said and done to me and my husband and our sibs would have by our parents would warrant a CPS investigation these days. And we all lived in normal middle class nuclear families. And bullies were to be ignored. And if you let it bother you, you were wimpy. Asked my dad. He grew up in rural Kentucky back in the 60s and he said boys had to be careful what they said to each other because protecting one's honor was still a thing. You could get into a fist fight if you called somebody a name, and it was expected that you stand up for yourself if an insult was addressed to you. You would be bullied and made fun of mercilessly if you weren't tough and didn't have the courage to stand up to yourself. But I grew up in the 2000s and even then any kind of violence was greatly frowned upon and people could get away with saying some very mean crap to each other without repercussions. Package delivery. Order something from a catalog. Expect 6 to 8 weeks for delivery. While you wait, you have no tracking and no idea when it will arrive. Just wait and hope. If it keeps not arriving, you can eventually investigate if something went wrong. We didn't mail order things very much back then. Getting your butt beat for doing something wrong by NBR Johnson or Miss Smith and knowing that when you get home you are going to get it again from your dad. Perfectly acceptable in my day, because they called your house and told your folks what you did. I'm 56 and grew up in the 60s and 70s, unable to communicate with friends, sometimes for days. While away on vacation with your family, you are totally cut off from everyone and have no idea what's going on back home, or what your so is up to. Absolutely no money and very few ways to make money. Most families have just one car and it was with the parent who worked, so forget rides. The best form of fun entertainment was a good old-fashioned sleepover. You had to go to the library to do almost any type of homework. Unable to communicate with friends, sometimes for days. That reminds me, going off to college university meant having to set up a whole new social circle. Nowadays, students can keep in instant contact with their friends from high school. Your class of 50 is assigned to write a paper on the Prussian War? Cool. The library has 3 books on the subject. Better hope you're one of the first 3 to the library or you're fricked. The murder rate in the US in the 1980s when I was teen was double what it is now. Same with property crime, violent crime and burglary. So in general things are much safer now but most people don't seem to realize it. Yes, there are a few places where crime and violence is still rampant but those places are much fewer and far between than they used to be. Even only 30 some years ago, have some medical condition like asthma, forget the smoke an inhaler and be fine in 30 seconds like today. I took some horrible liquid crap and it didn't do much and I sat around anoxic and jittery huffing for enough air to stay conscious. Now get off my lawn. In the 90s, you would have to download dirty pictures on a 56K modem, so it would take a while. Then you'd have to print them out on a black and white dot matrix printer so you could sneak the printouts into the bathroom to jerk off with. Because the computer was an expensive piece of machinery centrally located in the living room. Due to the technological limitations of these methods, tea would come out looking a bit square, and if you were into black chicks, like I was, you'd have to explain the rampant use of ink cartridges by saying that you were doing a lot of book reports and stuff, to which your parents would reply. Or in the off chance you decided not to print it and instead just use a computer, knowing that it would take a full 10 seconds minimum to close a window, so if you got caught you were fricked. Kind of added to the thrill tbh. If my grandmother were to answer, and she can't because she died at age 93 4 years ago, she would say death. She was one of 3 kids, and her much loved older sister died at age 12 of a lung infection in the late 1920s. It was rare to have all your children survive into adulthood. Now it is rare when someone loses a child. Period. Can't understand a song lyric? CD or tape booklet doesn't have lyrics included? You're crap out of luck. For years, my friends thought it was Kiss from a Rose on the Grave, and in spite of my rage, I'm still just ready to cave. I don't care what the real lyrics are, it'll always be Kissed by a Rose from the Grave for me. I'm 30, but my mother is in her 60s and gets pretty angry whenever anyone my age tries to romanticize the 60s and 70s. There were a lot of things that ranged from difficult to almost impossible for women during that time, including getting a credit card without a husband's permission, getting birth control again without a husband's permission, being taken seriously by a doctor, leaving an abusive spouse. Honestly, there are so many more, but these are the ones my mom either dealt with directly or witnessed in her friends. Mind you, she is a white woman with money. The problems were compounded with non-white and poor women. Not being able to take pictures whenever you wanted. If you wanted to take pictures, you had to buy film and carefully ration out the 24 or 36 shots. If you were on vacation, you'd probably make that road last 2-3 days because film ain't cheap. Like $5.7 a roll and then $8.9 to get developed. And obviously you should get doubles. Then you have to carefully save and file away the negatives in case you want to print out the pictures again. I studied abroad in China just before digital cameras became accessible to normal people, and a huge expense as a broke student was getting the 18 rolls of film I brought developed. Rationing those pictures, then realizing you ration too much and have like 10 photos left. End up taking 10 pictures of the trees or your house or something just so you can go get them developed, thus totally wasting it and making it so you don't have more pictures of cool things you wanted to photograph. 1950 garter belts and girdles. That was uncomfortable. I missed that. Thank goodness, but came along in time for the sanitary belt and all the fun that came along with that. Phone books that were thick enough to serve as booster seats at the grandparents' house for Sunday dinner. If you were real little, you might need both the white pages and the yellow pages to be able to reach your fork. Probably needing to acquire some mechanical skills to keep their first car running. My girlfriend's first car was a '69 Chevelle. It was just an old clunker at that point, 1982, and leaked oil like a MF. I must have changed every on-off part, like water pump, alternator, starter etc. on that car at one point or another. Man, I wish I still had every car I owned from 1979 to 1987. 68 Cougar, 71 Camaro, 71 Cutlass, few others in there. My mom grew up in the 1950s. She was left-handed. I say was because school nuns used to beat her left hand with a wooden stick every time she used it to write. For years, now she writes with her other hand. She also, like millions of others, lived her childhood daily life being completely immersed in Catholic scary stories about going to heck if you just think about anything remotely sexual or violent. She knew plenty of boys aged between 5 to 12 who were being abused. Telling the police about or parents what was happening was just getting the shut up child response. The province of Quebec before the 1960s was really something hard. No having your parents drive you around at Halloween. In my days it was trying not to get killed making your rounds on your bike. Wait, is this a thing people do now? I grew up in India in the socialist 80s before the economy was liberalized. If I wanted to go to some new part of town, because there was an ad in the paper for some event there, I'd have to ask my parents, who'd ask their friends, colleagues and neighbors if they knew how to get there by public transit. Cars were expensive, so no driving there. There weren't any reliable maps or timetables. So my mom's friend who had been to that neighborhood once 5 years ago for her cousin's wedding, would recall from memory the bus route to go there. After you get off the bus, you'd have to still walk to the destination, and she would draw you a map. You had to preserve that piece of paper and hope that the landmarks she mentioned were still there, and often her instructions would be lacking in some way, so you'd still have to ask people on the street how to get there. It would usually be fine, but there was always some butthole who would give terrible directions. So going anywhere new would become this crazy big project with the entire neighborhood knowing what you were up to. Google Maps is such a lifesaver. Dealing with the idea that the USSR has enough nukes pointed at us to destroy us several times over and suspecting that there will probably be a nuclear war that will keep us from ever growing old. Having to make a mental map in your head when exploring an area because there is no such thing as GPS. Getting lost despite trying to make a mental map and spending a very long time finding your way home. Growing up in the 90s meant there was a real danger of getting a barbed wire tattoo on your arm or a Chinese character of something you couldn't actually read. I'm not that old, I'm in my early 30s, but this was true at my grandma's house. If it was planned that everyone was meeting at 10 AM and half the relatives hasn't shown up, you'd go to the rotary wall phone, dial their house number and find out why they're still at home. Or if you can't reach them, wonder if they're still alive or stopping to get food, like always. Because there were no cell phones, no pagers, just pay phones. Usually said family members would show up at 10:30 AM and say they overslept or they had to get gas. This was normal. It's called the slow gene, a southern trait in my family which is way slower than normal time. My daughter, who is 4, has inherited this gene, which means we have to plan an extra 15 minutes to get her slow self out the door and in the car. It was pretty hard to get hold of your friends. Like, nobody had mobile phones, only landline, and there was no domestic internet either, so no email, no IM, no texting, just either they're at home and you can phone them or visit them physically, like, go round to their house and see if they're about, or nothing. That's it. They're unavailable. Couple that with the fact that there's one phone for the whole family and it's billed by the minutes spent on a call, meant that parents would pressure you not to stay on a call long, or would even forbid you from making calls. So a lot of my time in my youth was spent walking, cycling or riding buses to go see my friends, and often finding they'd gone out and my trip was fruitless. Usually that'd mean I'd go visit one friend, find they were out, maybe pop a note through their door and then hike over to another friend's nearby, make a few visits. I might pick someone up from their house and we'd go walk over to another person's house. And once we'd got together, a few of us, we might go back to one of our houses or go hang out at a local park. Often there was nothing for us to do, so we'd just wander the streets talking. This is why it pisses me off so much when I hear of people in authority calling young people hanging out on the street or in parks out for antisocial behavior. They're literally meeting their friends and making use of the one public space that is free to use. It's freaking social behavior. The other day I thought about my Mill, who will be 90 this year. She grew up in 1930 Germany after World War I. They were starving and had to barter their wine for food. She remembers being bombed, probably better off than most at the time. My mom grew up during the American Depression. Her dad was a grocer who extended credit. She was lucky but saw many people starving. I'm grateful for living during one of the most peaceful times in human existence. There's a purpose for government. It's not socialism. There's a contract for fiduciary responsibly with our tax dollars that needs to be addressed. No one should live in poverty in this first world country. The New Deal was established for that reason. America can do better. Much better. My mother and her family hid in the cupboard under the stairs when their town in the UK was bombed. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video. Bye for now.